Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and the continued slightly awkward time between St. Petersburg and Thermal. It is said every year this break is slightly too long. Don't worry about next year, we'll come back to that in a minute because this issue's been sorted for next year, but we always say this bit's a bit too long, and we get really excited for St. Petersburg on this podcast after 6 months of off-seasoning. Oh my goodness me, I've got no idea what we're going to do this week on off-seasoning. What on earth are we going to find? We pull something out the pits of the barrel every single week, and you're like, we finally got to St. Petersburg. And you come back 2 weeks later between the gap between St. Petersburg and Thermal, and you come back to the podcast, you're like, oh, hang on. We run out of ideas again. We were banking all for St. Petersburg, and now we've got this little awkward gap. And we'll have a little awkward gap between Thermal and Long Beach as well, because I believe that's another 3-week gap between races. So I think it's going to be 2 weeks after that, which is fine. But it's always a slightly difficult period on the podcast for us. I mean, it's only happened once before, but where there's such a gap, we've like built up all to the season, and then you've got these 3 weeks of, well, hang on, there's nothing really much to talk about. We don't have enough racing to review, but we don't have enough to look forward to.
I mean, we coin our off-season episodes off-seasoning. I was going to say this is like mid-seasoning, but it's hardly mid-seasoning. It's more like kind of early seasoning.
Starting of the seasoning.
Start of seasoning. But yeah, it's kind of annoying, isn't it? And I think on kind of a more serious point on it, like you have all of this momentum, don't you? All of the kind of traction built up with the first race on Fox and all of the promotion and a very, very good first TV rating, which I don't know if I've actually touched on. But yeah, I mean, it's slightly irritating after all of the momentum built that it kind of gets punctuated ever so slightly. But no, we're on the home stretch of this first weird little 3-week break.
It's an issue which will be sorted for next season, as I get onto right at the end. But yeah, bit of a difficult gap this. But as always, we said this on episode 100 last week. We have never missed an episode in 2 years almost. So and that I intend to keep that going for as long as we possibly can. I mean, we will be delving the pits of the barrel, which we might be doing this week, but we try and bring you the best content possibly can. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, we had an awesome interview with Connor Daly, about 50 minutes long, really interesting to sort of get the insights of somebody who's been on and off the IndyCar scene for several years, see his thoughts of his move to Hinkles-Hollinger Racing, and just the thoughts of probably the craziest career one of the craziest careers that IndyCar has ever seen, the amount of teams and the amount of last-minute substitute drives he's had to do. So really interesting interview if you haven't listened to that already. And 2 more songs that were added to the driver playlist as well. So what I'll do is I'll link this one at the description of this episode if you haven't found the driver playlist yet. Follow it, whatever you need to do. Let's get more momentum on the driver playlist. But we'll stop keeping you waiting. We'll do what we do. Well, we'll say what we're doing this week. And on this podcast, regular listeners will know we love a prediction. We absolutely crave a prediction. We've got weekly predictor tournaments, which we do every week, which we will have to do at the end of this week for our Fast 6 predictor tournament. And of course, we had a whole season predictions episode. We love predictions on this podcast, but I've had a thought. We do all the predicting, so it's time to let some of you do the predicting. So what we have done is we've reached out to some of you on Reddit. We asked for your wild predictions on Reddit. We haven't seen them yet. There's quite a few comments that we haven't seen them yet. So we're going to react to your wild IndyCar opinions today, just to see what some of you are thinking. And we might agree with some of you, we might disagree with some of you. And then right at the end, obviously being the Thermal Club this weekend, we're going to delve into IndyCar's first Grand Prix of Thermal with a very quick preview, just looking ahead to the weekend. As we said, we'll do a tiny bit of news and a little bit of predicting, as we always do. But we're ready for some hopefully wild opinions today.
This should be good. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, so as I said, I've not seen any of these, so we'll
nor have I.
As we go. So we'll start off with, we'll see Grosjean in an IndyCar before the end of the season. I don't think this is too wild. I think it's if we're doing we need like a spice rating here, like it's not. We need to rate it out of 10 how wild this prediction is. I think this is about a bit of a 4, this one, I reckon. It's not too wild.
Tame. It's pretty tame. Yeah, 4 or 5, it's kind of mid-level. Yeah, I guess digging into it, there are obviously suggestions, and I can't remember where they kind of originated from, but that Grosjean could somehow end up in a third entry.
Did it not originate from him?
I can't remember exactly, which is bad journalism from our part. But there was this thing going around that maybe Grosjean could be in a third Prema car for the Indy 500, which I just don't see really as being that feasible, just for the fact that this is a team that's never driven on an oval before in IndyCar, well, in anything. This will be their first oval race, their first Indy 500, and you would think they would be far more benefited just focusing on their two cars, wouldn't you? And I think I'm not even sure there's any Chevy kind of entries left for the 500 anyway. So it just seems implausible unless, say, Robert Schwartzman was miles off the pace and they were desperate to get into the field and wanted to throw Grosjean in there, for instance. Other than that, I guess, I don't know, you'd probably be looking at a substitute appearance. If he's their reserve driver, he's probably going to be on hand fairly frequently. So yeah, I don't think it's impossible that Grosjean will be in a car this year. I also don't think it's super likely, but it's not the wildest of predictions.
Yeah, I think substitute, really. I think you'd imagine being a reserve, he'll be at the track quite a bit, I'd imagine. And you don't want it to happen, but there could well be a scenario where a driver has to drop out mid-weekend for whatever reason, and he's a reliable pair of hands, well, maybe reliable is the wrong word, but he's been in the series for what? How many years? What, 4 years? 4 years. Grosjean was in the series, which is more than you feel like it has been. But yeah, he's somebody who's been in the car recently, who's got some bit of experience. Obviously, driven both a Honda and a Chevrolet, so pretty safe bet there. I mean, can do okay on the oval. So you feel like with the amount of replacement races that happen naturally in a season, he'll get one somewhere in some way. So I don't think that's too wild, at least to start off with. So,
yeah, I guess if you look at like how last season panned out, to be fair, like you had the opportunities for Daly, for instance, as he spoke about on our last episode. You have those kind of opportunities crop up. You get to crunch time late in the season, and drivers and teams are fighting to make it into the leaders' circle. And Grosjean is kind of a veteran now after those 4 years. He's obviously got experience at a top team in Andretti. He's had some success, obviously never won a race, but he'd be a pretty handy substitute if, Prema were to allow him to go to any other team, because it might not necessarily be at Prema that he was to get that opportunity.
Of the substitutes available, he'd probably alongside Lundqvist would probably be your first picks if they were around. So
certainly.
Yeah, not too wild. I'll actually demote that one's going to be a 3. I think that is fairly safe. I'm demoting that to a 3. Next one, not crazy, but I see Christian Lundgaard becoming McLaren's #1 IndyCar driver. Now he says this isn't crazy, but I think this is a bit crazy. I think
that's like a 9.
No. I think maybe we don't know what's going to come, so I reckon we give ourselves a bit of margin here. I mean, maybe say it's 7, but interesting take. So obviously, I think it's well clear that Pato O'Ward is McLaren's #1 driver and has been for 4 seasons now. And they brought people in like Rossi, who was a very reliable driver, who'd been a vice champion, who'd won 8-9 races, as somebody to challenge O'Ward. And O'Ward, sure, like once every 3 races, O'Ward would be matched by Rossi, and Rossi posed an okay challenge to O'Ward. And the same applied to Rosenqvist after his great debut year at Ganassi, or his good 2 years at Ganassi. And both these people were brought in to sort of challenge O'Ward, and O'Ward has really comfortably beaten them on both occasions. Rossi and Rosenqvist between them got probably about 4 or 5 podiums at McLaren. I mean, O'Ward is getting that in a season on the majority of occasions. So that's where you start off, because both of them had a bigger reputation than Lundgaard. Maybe Rosenqvist was fairly similar to Lundgaard when he came to McLaren, but they tried it before, bringing in a big name to challenge O'Ward, and it hasn't worked. We said this before, but Lundgaard's always been a bit of a difficult one, because where RLL have been slowly regressing in the last couple of years, and Lundgaard's seemingly been improving, we don't know where Lundgaard really ever has been, especially since he's been at Toronto. I mean, how good is he an oval driver? We still really don't know that. You're comparing him to a team who often have had a pay driver, and Graham Rahal, who's reliable, but he's not the quickest on any given day. So he had a good debut at St. Petersburg. I think that's got to be said. O'Ward had a bit of a difficult weekend, but you feel like Lundgaard won't have the over pedigree. I mean, sure, and in fairness, his prediction isn't saying it's going to be short term, it's going to be saying long term. But where you feel like O'Ward is already one of the top Oval Series drivers, and O'Ward's still young, he's still only 25. where he's a great oval driver and a driver who has won 6 races for that team, 7 races for that team, and nobody else has, I feel like it's going to be hard to topple him, at least in the next couple of years.
I think there's another way you can look at this, because as you say, there's no time frame has been put on it. And covering a bit of F1 news here on the podcast, Oscar Piastri has signed a new long-term contract with McLaren's Formula One team. Lando Norris also has a long-term contract there. And the way that their Formula One team is performing, they're not going to want to get rid of those drivers, and those drivers are not going to want to leave that team. So what is in it for O'Ward to stay at Arrow McLaren long-term if they cannot prove that they have the pedigree to match your Penske's and your Ganassis? So something that makes this prediction possibly less wild is maybe Lundgaard will become McLaren's guy, because Pastor O'Ward won't be at the team in 2 or 3 years' time, because it's felt like the main incentive for him being on McLaren's books, as well as obviously them being a promising IndyCar team and can probably pay him a hell of a lot of money, is the F1 links and the F1 reserve driver role. And ultimately, if it's not going to allow O'Ward to have that path into F1, then why should he stay there? What's the point?
But where does he go? Does he like being that team? Because you realistically won't be a Penske. Do they want him to put well? Maybe there's a place if Dixon goes, but do you want him up against Pillow? That's an interesting one. Andretti, maybe, but
that's the other thing to consider, isn't it? But you look in, I don't know, 5 years' time, for instance, are McLaughlin and Newgarden both going to be at Penske still? Possibly not. And I think O'Ward is clearly what he has produced an Arrow McLaren team where, you know, Alexander Rossi, for instance, has been a top IndyCar driver. I know since the Aero screen, he's kind of dropped off somewhat and he's not had the same success, but he really just was not close to matching O'Ward. And O'Ward has been superb at that team. And I firmly believe from what he has produced there, despite, you know, some of the inconsistencies and the instability around him at the team, for him to have continued to kind of not always thrive, but to have the successes that he has had, I believe he is one of the best drivers in the series. And that, you know, he's one of the most popular, of course, but I also do believe he is one of the best. And I think if I was a Penske or Ganassi, okay, maybe he'll come up against a Pillow. But, you know, you look at Penske, Newgarden and Power have been competing and have both still won championships. So, yeah, I don't see that as an issue for O'Ward. If you are believing yourself as a top driver, then you want to challenge yourself.
So we're saying Lundgaard will never become McLaren's number one as long as O'Ward's there.
I think that is the conclusion. Yes.
Fine.
I think it's O'Ward's team.
Both our points are valid, just in different ways. Because it is O'Ward's team, and I've always said this. I think, and I know I'm the president of the O'Ward fan club, so I don't really have an opinion here. But I've always thought O'Ward is a better driver than what his team is showing him.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
And I don't think people realise that, because one, he is the most popular driver in the series, and two, because people think, okay, McLaren are a global motorsport name, they are good. But I mean, I'm not saying they're not good in IndyCar, but I don't think they're as good as people generally think they are, in my opinion. Anyway, the same person commented something else, which you're quite like. VK will win the Indy 500.
This year or just in general?
Never doesn't say. I think this year in a coin will be a bit of a stretch. I mean, nothing's ever impossible, but
I don't believe that will happen this year for Dale Coyne Racing. As much as, to be fair, he obviously had a very strong St. Pete, and I believe he had a pretty strong test at Barber as well. There's been a test at Barber in the last week or so, and I think he was kind of up at the pointy end or near enough the pointy end yet again. But obviously that's not an oval. Dale Coyne Racing failed to make the race last year in terms of Nolan Siegel. So they've got a hell of a lot to find. And I know VK has been exceptional at the 500. Obviously, his qualifying performance last year was heroic, crashing and then bouncing back to qualify 7th, make it into the Fast 12. Before that, he hadn't qualified any lower than 4th Fred Carpenter Racing. So he's got pedigree. I mean, he's not always converted in the race necessarily, but I think someday he will win the Indy 500 because he's one of the fastest drivers that we've seen at the Indy 500.
What's wild? I'll say 5 down the middle. I mean, we don't know. I mean, anything Indy, you can't predict it. I mean, I'd
maybe go for a 4, just because we've seen such. You know, he's been on the front row 2 or 3 times.
He's got to get top. Will anybody ever trust him on the top drive?
Connor Daly believes that he deserves the opportunity again.
Yeah.
Last week's episode.
Does Roger Penske chip Ganassi or Dan Towers believe that?
Well, maybe after he finishes in the top 10 in the championship this season with Coyne and continues this form shown at the start of the season.
You didn't predict that in your pre-season prediction, so you can't.
I'm predicting it now.
Well, you can't. It's too late now. Yeah, it's been locked in several episodes ago. Kramer gets a road win. I think that's a good 9. I reckon that's a good 9.
You think that's a 9?
Well, it's better than Lundgaard.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to think. I mean, obviously, saying Prema would get an oval win is about as bold as you can get, given they've never driven on.
Maybe we'll go 8. We'll give us a bit more leeway.
But I think would they get a road course win? I mean, you'd be banking on a chaotic race.
It doesn't technically say a time frame, so it could be in 10 years' time. It might be.
Okay, so if you're saying
we'll say the majority of these are for 2025, just as a because basis. But
Prema, I have very little doubts will win a race at some point, as long as they stick around long enough and it isn't some catastrophic failure.
Some teams have stuck around a very long time and still haven't won a race. But to be fair, no, Hunkos might be the only team in the field to have never won a race.
I mean, you just look at Prema and their pedigree, obviously. I mean, they started the season well in St. Pete. Like, I know.
Down. They saw the flag.
But yeah, they saw the flag without issue. I know they had a few teething problems through the weekend, but to have both drivers on the lead lap in the top 20, I think is a pretty good weekend. I know they've probably got higher expectations than their drivers do. Obviously, that was more. Nothing
to suggest they're going to win a race this year.
No, absolutely not. And I don't think they will win a race this year, but at least they are competitive. I don't believe they will win a race this year. I mean, it's so difficult, right? I mean, since 2021, when you had Castro Neves and VK win races for Meyershank Racing and Ed Carpenter Racing, you've had one race winner outside of Penske, Ganassi, Andretti, and Aaron McLaren, which was Lundgaard at Toronto in 23 with Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan. So, this is it's difficult for teams that are not these big four, this big four, to win races.
But there's no way they win a race before like Meyershank does or a Foyt does.
No. I think I don't think it's going to happen. But I would rank it maybe I think an 8's fair, because something crazy could happen. You can't ever rule that out in Detroit.
Multiple wins for Malukas. I will say again this year. I mean, probably again that's probably a similar sort of an 8. I mean, one win you'd probably say that maybe that's not as bold, but 2 wins feels like a bit of a stretch, because I know Santino Ferrucci said they're winning for a championship, but not once was Ferrucci really like contending for a race win at all last year. Malukas to win 2, it feels like a stretch.
I mean, and they didn't start the season particularly well. What were they, 13th, 14th in St. Pete? So it's not awful. It's certainly better than what they were doing in 2023. But considering obviously Ferrucci was in the top 10 11 times last season, it wasn't phenomenal. That's not to say that this is going to be a trend for the season and they won't kind of be, fighting in the top 10 again, and the Penske relationship will shine through. But yeah, I think Sayer win multiple races, as we've just said, the difficulty of teams that are not in that big four. Obviously, within the big four, it's kind of a case of anyone could win on any weekend. But outside of that, pretty tough. I mean, my bold prediction before the season was that Foyt and Ed Carpenter Racing would win races, and I said Malukas would win a race, but to think he would win 2 seems a stretch.
Will Power gives a double bird again this year. I think that's a 0. So we'll quickly move on for that.
I mean, did we get it last year?
Yeah, we did. Gateway.
Oh, we did, didn't we? Yes. I was thinking of obviously 23 we had Road America, didn't we? Yeah, of course we got it at Gateway last year to his own teammate.
Yeah, so that's about a 0. So
let's say it'll happen. I feel like it's just a novelty thing now.
Juncos Hollinger Racing is sold to Trackhouse Racing. This is an interesting one. I like this. So if you don't know who Trackhouse Racing are, they run 3 cars on the NASCAR Cup Series for Ross Chastain, Daniel Suarez, and Shane Van Gisbergen. They've also got presence in MotoGP with, I don't follow MotoGP very well. One's Raul Fernandez. I think the other one is Ayagura, off the very top of my head, at MotoGP. So they were owned by Pitbull, but he actually left the ownership of the team a couple of years ago. But Trackhouse are known for doing a cool, they're quite a trendy, cool motorsport team who sort of break the mold in some ways. If you don't know what they do in NASCAR, they run something called the Project 91 entry, which just promotes international drivers to race in their cars. I think Kimi Räikkönen and was in that car once.
Helio Castro Neves raced the Daytona 500 this year in that car.
Let me double check Raikkonen. So Raikkonen did do 2 races with Trackhouse in the 91. And then they obviously got Shane Van Gisbergen, who famously won on debut in Chicago, who as I said, is now with the team full time. And then Helio Castroneves drove the car this year, at Daytona. And they've got Connor Zilich on their books, who's one of the most promising talents in American motorsport. So they're a team who are quite popular because they've just got a big presence, and I said they sort of break the traditional NASCAR mold. Justin Marks, as the owner, said before he'd like to participate in the Indianapolis 500. He fielded an entry at Daytona with Corvette TS Sport, which was Van Gisbergen, Scott McLaughlin, Zilich, and a bronze driver who is the name Ben Keating, who's particularly good in the endurance scene. So they're sort of a big name team of Trackhouse, and as I said, they've entered MotoGP as well just in the last couple of years. So. That's a bit of Trackhouse, if you didn't know about the Trackhouse. Will they take over Juncos for Collinger Racing? Well, I think it's quite possible. Juncos are obviously one of the smaller teams. We know they've been having a little bit of budgetary issues in the last couple of years. You saw what happened with Conor Daly at St. Petersburg, relying a lot on pay drivers. They folded their Indy Next program. They've been filled with controversy for several years. So this sort of links into the charter agreement where Trackhouse, for example, would have to buy Juncos' 2 charters. Well, this is a scenario where Trackhouse would potentially buy Juncos' 2 charters. So I feel Trackhouse are still quite new in the NASCAR scene, and they haven't. I'm not saying they haven't found success because they've won several races. Ross Chastain's been a NASCAR Cup Series vice champion. Would they want to find more success in the NASCAR scene? Maybe, but this could be 3-4 years down the line. But I see Trackhouse in some capacity in IndyCar taking over Juncos. If you would pick any team, maybe it would be Juncos. But I like that. I like that prediction. I mean, wildness. I mean, I guess maybe a 6 or 7. Mark. Yeah.
I think it's because it's plausible. Just because we have seen Trackhouse obviously doing these ventures outside of NASCAR. Obviously, MotoGP being a more permanent one, but also putting on these one-offs like in the Rolex 24, as you mentioned, with that very exciting Corvette entry, and it was on the broadcast there that Justin Marks spoke very openly about wanting to tick off these bucket list races, including the Indy 500. So I wonder whether the initial step for Trackhouse would simply be an Indy 500 entry before they were to say make that leap and expand fully into IndyCar. But if the opportunity was to arise, and as you say, Juncos Hollinger Racing have clearly struggled a little bit financially. They've not had that financial firepower of some other teams as one of the smaller outfits in the series. Obviously, they have often overachieved. They've got Stingray Robb, who has come in and had to bring a hatful of budget there, and Conor Daly obviously came in with the polka dot funding, lost that, and is having to work very hard to acquire more funding in order to keep funding that program, because Brad Hollinger kind of used to fund a little bit. He would say, he paid for Grosjean and for Canapino to be in that team, but they often lacked partners as a team. And, Hollinger putting that money in is not so plausible or feasible anymore. I think that's a really good prediction. That.
Yeah, I like it. And yeah, Trackhouse Big Goes is 2022, which I think was the year that Chastain, came second in the championship. So will they want more success on the NASCAR side? That remains to be seen. But I do like that, and I think they are a team that would, if you were to pick anybody, would probably be one of the ones you'd say are most likely to move over to IndyCar. I don't think it's a particularly next year thing. I think you'd probably be looking at another 3-4 years before something like that happens. But yeah, I like the prediction. Right, we'll move on. You'll like this one. VK gets 3 or 4 top 5s and finishes higher than Rossi in the points.
3 or 4 top 5.
Yeah, I feel that's a bit of a stretch.
I mean, he's obviously started the season with a major leap up from what Coyne managed last year. Obviously, they finished a best of 13th in any one race, I think 3 times last year.
I will, quietly say, though, the standard of driver they had last year wasn't incredible.
So you had Harvey finish 13th twice, I believe, and Sowery as well once. I think to say he'll finish in the top 5 3 or 4 times is quite bold. Even looking, say, you earmark the Indy 500 as a strong point. As we mentioned, Coyne were not that competitive at Indy last year. I don't think that'll happen. I don't think it'll happen. You just look at the standard of driver at the very top teams, and VK could be on par with some of them, but he's also at an organisation that struggled so much last season that you can't expect them to replicate what they managed in St. Pete every single weekend. And even then, that was just getting into the top 10, which is not to take anything away.
They always struggled more on ovals as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's not to take anything away from that top 10 finish, because that is super impressive that they managed that. But to make that step to top 5, I mean, you weren't even seeing AJ Foyt Racing do that last year, and they were regarded as so impressive. So I think it's probably not going to happen. Finish ahead of Rossi, I mean, it'd be poetic, I guess. I think maybe over the course of the season,
that's
probably
less wild. But
I think possibly not over the course of the season. Just again, looking last year, Coin were, they were battling to make the leaders circle. I say battling to make the leaders circle. Neither of their cars were particularly close to making the leaders circle with all the instability that was going on there. Whereas obviously VK comfortably made the leaders circle for Carpenter, and they the 20 car as well, which Rasmussen drove last year, would have comfortably made it, really, if he was in for the full season, you would have thought. I think he probably won't finish ahead of Rossi, but I don't think it's impossible. I wouldn't rule it out entirely.
Yeah, I mean, craziness scale, 6
or 7.
We gave a lot of 6 7s. Yeah, I mean, he definitely won't get 3 top 5s, so I'll comfortably say that. I mean, even with Carpenter, VK really didn't get many top 5s. I think he got 1 last year, if I remember correctly, which is in Iowa. Let's have a look. Yeah, he got 1 in Iowa, and then his last top 5 before that was Iowa. Last top 5 before that was Mid-Ohio the same year. So considering he's got 3 top 5s in 3 years with Carpenter, I feel like saying that he'll do the same with Coin in 1 is a bit of a stretch. Higher than Rossi in points, I guess it's feasible if Rossi has a bad year. But I doubt it. But bit wild. If you didn't know the way it works, we're going top to bottom, so it's the most popular ones to the least popular ones. So by upvotes. O'Ward gets back at New Garden at the Indy 500. Finally wins it. I mean, I really don't think that's wild at all. I think it's about 2. I think you obviously can't guarantee anything at Indianapolis, but if you were to pick somebody in the field who hasn't won it, who you think will win it, I think Pat O'Ward would be many people's number 1 pick.
He's knocking on the door. It's between O'Ward and Palou, and I think O'Ward has shown more than Palou at Indy as well.
Definitely.
Obviously, Palou probably should have won in 23 before he got crushed into by VK in the pits.
I mean, O'Ward could have won in 23 before his collision with Ericsson. So, I mean, it goes around a million ways.
Exactly. But O'Ward has come so close so often. It's a matter
of O'Ward you could have an argument. He could have won the last 4 years. Well, Palou was quiet last year, where Ganassi weren't strong. 22, don't remember. 21, he was obviously very close to winning it. But other people who haven't won it, O'Ward showed the most pedigree. I think Palou probably ranked 2nd, but O'Ward.
I mean, 22 is when he was fighting with Ericsson until the very death.
Yeah. 23, the same thing. 24 with New Garden. So, yeah.
Obviously, I think McLaughlin's another one who hasn't won it that you've got to keep an eye out on. I think last year was a breakthrough for him, but obviously we've not seen him fighting right at the front.
Yeah, it wasn't there. Kind of a wild prediction, but definitely possible. All 6 over races will be won by different drivers, which is the polar opposite to my bold prediction for the year, which I said Scott McLaughlin will win them all. So I disagree with this heavily, but it's too many short ovals for a Penske driver to not pick up 2. Really, I think.
Yeah, I'd say maybe it's a 6 or a 7. It's in that's just above mid range. But Penske have been prominent, haven't they, on the short ovals and.
But even so, I mean, I guess you could have a theoretical world where 3 Penskes win, O'Ward wins, Herta wins, and a Ganassi wins. But you feel like Penske's oval package in recent years has just been too strong for at least one of their drivers to not pick up 2, considering they have at least 2 of the best 3 oval drivers in the series anyway.
I mean, 2 seasons in a row, New Garden was kind of pushing to win every single short oval race, every single oval race. So.
Well, that is bold, but yeah, I disagree with that. I mean, I have to disagree with that for the purposes of my own prediction. I'm like you switching and changing halfway through the season. You've got to stick firm with your predictions. So, Helio Castroneves will win his 5th Indianapolis 500. He's obviously would become the first man to ever do it, if that is the case. I mean, ever since he won it, he hasn't shown too much. I mean, if you look back at his last 3 Mays, you probably don't really remember much at all. I think he finished 7th, 22. Last year was pretty anonymous. So, I mean, I don't think there's not a single person who wouldn't like to see it. But I just think he's the 500. There's so many factors which go into it. But there's a lot more people you'd have in your pecking order to win before Cash and Evers, is what I'd say.
Yeah, but again, would you have said in 21 that he was going to go and win his fourth in a one-off entry for Meyer Shank Racing team that was kind of in its formative years? Probably not.
No,
so
but I still think this is like an 8 or 9 bold.
Could I throw in the fact that they also now have the Ganassi relationship? And I know Ganassi, to be fair, weren't really there at Indy last year.
I don't think it means as much as like a Floyd Penske relationship. So,
but I'd go for a 7. I go for a 7 with this one.
Okay. With as dominating as Palou has been the last few years, my wild prediction is that Dixon one-ups him and wins his 7th championship.
I mean, Dixon could have won St. Pete, right? I mean,
he probably should have done.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking back to when we did our top 3 drivers of the weekend, and I think I went for McLaughlin, Palou, Dixon. I definitely would put Dixon ahead of Palou on revision, just because of how impressive what he did without a radio was. And if he had the radio, came in when they wanted him to pit, wasn't stuck in the traffic, Palou instead stayed out and was stuck in the traffic, Dixon would have won that race, and that would have been a fair and square fight between them. I mean, I don't think it's impossible, but again, I think Palou, what we've seen from him that is just so impressive is his ability to just switch it on in the middle of a race. He can be managing and then all of a sudden zoom second faster a lap than every other car on track. I think over the course of the season, Palou probably just will outlast Dixon again. That's what we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, Dixon is great, but I've said this before. You never go into a weekend and Dixon is the fastest person. I mean, he hasn't got pole on a road course in 8 years or 9 years, whatever. I think it's 9 years now. Dixon, that sounds terrible, but Dixon relies on good strategy and pulling the rabbit out the hat when it comes to races because
and let's just say in saying that he has an ability to execute these strategies that other drivers simply don't have.
Yeah, absolutely. But you can't rely on executing strategies every single week to win your championship because
for sure
it won't work. So yeah, I think as long as Palou is around in the same team as Dixon, I don't really see Dixon being Palou across the course of the season.
Agreed.
Anymore. So yeah, I don't think that's that wild. I think that's almost like a 5. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I would say middle of the park as well.
We'll move on to Felix Rosenqvist. Ends the season above all the Penske drivers. Now this is bold.
10 out of 10.
Yeah, maybe 9, just in case somebody says Rob will win the championship or something. But yeah, I think that's a 9. That's definitely a 9. I mean,
that's incredible. Even with the Ganassi link,
sorry, no.
No, these are 3 Penske drivers at the top of their game. And Felix Rosenqvist at the top of his game, but he's still, regardless of any Ganassi alliance driving for Meyer Shank Racing, who are so much less funded than
podiumless in 4 years. And they've got to be Penske who are winning 6-7 races a year. So yeah, I respect it, but no. Valtteri Bottas is in an IndyCar seat next year and wins a race in his first 2 years. He said he'd consider Indy, and after a year sitting out, I think he will make a leap. If an Indy driver moves to the Cadillac team, that'll open up a seat at a race-winning team. Even if Bottas doesn't get that seat, he'll find one in the ensuing musical chairs. On track, Grosjean had chances, but Bottas is better, and he particularly excels at low-grip circuits like some of the street circuits. Indy races, particularly street races, can be something of a crazy one. I was going to say snag a podium, but if we're going for a wild prediction, I might as well go for a win.
That was a very, very in-depth piece of analysis to back that up.
Well, I asked people to put in-depth analysis and didn't really happen too much.
Hey, it's making me believe it. I
think the logic is good.
The only point to really kind of, I guess, go against what is being said is I do fancy him for that Cadillac seat as kind of the veteran alongside a Colton Herta, for instance.
But you got people like Sergio Perez still around in the F1 market, so.
For sure. And I mean, Bottas would be a great IndyCar driver. He's a guy that's really found his personality since he left Mercedes, really. I know he's back there as a reserve driver now, but I feel like he'd fit right in. and I feel like this is a guy who's won a lot of races in F1, and a lot of them up against, or all of them up against Lewis Hamilton. I think I think
I can only see him at Andretti because I definitely can't see him at McLaren. I definitely can't see him at Penske, and I feel like a Ganassi, Simpson, Dixon, and Pillay, I feel will be your lineup for a bit longer.
So we have a weird situation where Herta takes a seat that Bottas is after in F1 going to Cadillac, and Bottas goes the other way and takes Herta's seat to Andretti in IndyCar.
Yes. Yeah. And
I think in that case, he would win. I think he'd win a race in the first 2 years.
Win a race?
I reckon he would. I'd be confident.
Yeah, let's give it a 5. I mean, middle of the road. I think it's good feasibility for this one. It's logical. I'd
go a little bit higher. I'd say 6 maybe.
Okay.
Just because you're relying on him in getting the drive and then also winning a race.
Lundgaard wins the 500 this year. I mean, we won't do too many wins the 500s, but I like your prediction. But we don't know. We don't know Lundgaard's ability. We don't know what McLaren's package. Yeah, don't know.
A lot of questions.
Well, any Indy 500 win prediction now is a 5 because you don't know. So, unless it's someone like Abel, we might bump it up a little bit. But I mean, obviously, it's a big year for Lundgaard at the 500 because he's now got a previous capable 500 driver. He said quite a lot that he's happy he sort of had to run through the pack the last couple of years because he's now done the difficult bit as such. He's now got the easy bit. So that's something to bear in mind. But I mean, again, same as Cashew. There's other people I'd pick before him, but you never know. I mean, there's certainly picks in recent years you said that never would have happened. So I see David Malukas winning a race this year yet again, but Ferrucci going winless and still finishing ahead of him in the points. Malukas is way peaking with his performances, but Santino has more consistency.
I don't think it's that. That's probably like a. I mean,
Malukas still winning a race is relatively bold.
That's a fairly bold part.
I feel like a lot of people have almost normalised that's going to happen, which I think is completely wrong.
It's not a given. I mean, obviously, we've seen him come close. I guess in kind of every season he's driven in IndyCar, he's come close to winning a race. Obviously, the couple of gateways with Coyne, and last year, was it Gateway last year where he got wiped out by Power? Yeah, I could see it. If Malukas does win a race, I could still see Ferrucci beating him in the championship. Yeah. It's going to be so. We've spoken about this loads. It's going to be so tight between those two. That is as an exciting a battle as I think there is between teammates, to be honest. Especially if Foyt are as competitive as we kind of expected, and obviously Ferrucci coming into the season saying they were possible championship contenders.
Robert Schwartzman gets a podium or wins a race. Probably like a 7 from what we've seen so far. I mean, it'll take a Detroit-style race, but it's not impossible. I
mean, yeah, it goes back to the earlier one, doesn't it? I guess the difference being podium more likely is obviously more likely to win. I still don't think it'll happen this year, especially Schwartzman has a lot of learning to do. He's going to go to pretty much every track. I know he'll have tested a few, including thermal, to be fair, but he's going to go to a lot of these tracks, especially when you get to the ovals and he's never driven them before. So he's going to be learning as the team learn as well. I think that's going to be a challenge.
So I'll rattle off the last sort of 5 or 7 or 8 a bit quick fire. 2 of the 3 drivers in this group will finish outside the top 5 in the standings. Will Power, Scott Dixon, Pato Award. We both predicted that. So I don't think really that's that wild because you still got 2 other Penske's, you got Pillay, you got Herta. I don't really think that's that crazy, to be honest. So
yeah, I mean, obviously Dixon finished 6th last year, didn't he? I think Award will probably be in the top 5. Obviously, he salvaged a pretty good result in St. Pete. Power's on the back foot. I know, obviously, you saw especially McLaughlin last year recovered very handily from a bad start, but Power is now going to be in recovery mode, and it probably won't be for a while until he manages to catch back up until we've seen attrition.
I don't think that's crazy. I'm going maybe a 3. I think that's quite feasible, to be honest. McLaughlin, multiple title winner to make it wild, only one with Penske. Well, I think McLaughlin being a title winner with Penske is not a crazy one at all. Another team, but I don't really see him leaving Penske.
Yeah, this is the thing.
Soon, so.
Him being a multiple title winner feels extremely reasonable. Going and winning one with another team, he's just signing a new long-term deal with Penske. I can see him being with Penske really for his entire IndyCar career, unless something goes catastrophically wrong.
Yeah.
So I guess that's
I guess it's like a 7 because of that.
Yeah.
But like championship is multiple-time champion. I don't think really is bold, but I think that is bold. Saying he went with a different team. Rasmussen wins the Indy 500. Yeah, be a bit more of a friendly pick for me because Carpenter had been strong and we saw what he did in his debut. So I'd actually say a 4 for that one. But yeah, I mean,
This year, do you
sure.
mean?
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that team has been strong at the 500 and has never won it, even with obviously Ed Carpenter, veteran, VK being quick there. So I would give that a 6 or a 7 just because this is only Rasmussen's second year, but he was very impressive there last year.
Iowa loses one of its races to Milwaukee. I don't really see that because Iowa's too big of an event, and I feel Milwaukee's not a huge market.
I don't see Milwaukee gaining one back. I also, on the other hand, do believe that Iowa losing one of its races, especially.
I don't think that's that impossible. But...
No, because High V's gone now, so it's not going to be quite the event that it was before. And if you're adding all of these new races like Arlington and exploring these new markets, then losing an Iowa race, which is kind of just...
I think double headers will be gone within a few years, to be honest.
Yeah, so I think Iowa might lose a race, but I don't think Milwaukee or anywhere else really for that matter would gain one.
Rasmussen wins ECR before Rossi. I mean, I don't think either of them win a race at ECR, so that's going to save me a favour. I know you think...
You don't think either... Do you mean just this year? Or do you think
just in general? I don't think either of them will ever win a race at ECR.
I think... Yeah, I mean, I obviously said they will this year. That was my bold prediction. I think one of them will win a race over the course of time because they seem to be in this for a long haul.
It's will Rasmussen win one before Rossi?
Oh, sorry. No, I don't think he will. I think Rossi will win one before Rasmussen. But I don't think it's... Again, I don't think... I would give it a 4 in terms of boldness because I think it could happen. I just don't think it will happen. But that's just a prediction.
Grosjean coming back as a substitute says he'll win his first race as a substitute though with a Prema. So I'm ranking that as a 9. That is outlandish.
Yeah, that's a 9.
We won't go back into Grosjean, but Prema winning is crazy. Grosjean coming back is crazy, and Grosjean winning is crazy. So that goes straight to 9.
I was going to say there's a lot of multi-pronged ones out there where it's like, in order for them to achieve this massive feat, something else actually has to happen first.
Last one, Rossi will be driving for Dale Coyne in 2 years. Absolutely not, because he signed a 3-year deal.
Fair enough. Unless it goes horrendously wrong at ECR, and obviously Coyne would snap up any veteran free agent because they don't seem to have drivers on multi-year deals that frequently.
That's a nice way to end it. I think. What's been your favourite wild prediction of the ones we've done? I did quite like Trackhouse. That was a good one.
I'd probably say the Trackhouse one. I think that's kind of the most logical. It'd be cool, I guess.
And the most fun, I think, of all of them, the most fun.
Yeah, you don't want to lose Hunkos, obviously. That would be sad. But I think it's a very... I just think it's a good prediction. I think it's a good call.
A little bit of fun, right? Just for the last little bit of the episode, we'll just recap 1 or 2 bits of news from last week. First of all, the Arlington date got announced. That's going to happen March 13th to 15th next year, which already puts the firm on a bit of a jeopardy, but we sort of felt like that was going to happen anyway. So that's happening. We sort of estimated it'd be around that time anyway, but now it's got a date confirmed. What also has been confirmed, which we sort of suspected but was never really rumoured, is that Takuma Sato will be back at the Indianapolis 500 with Rahal Lemon Lanigan Racing, as he was last year, and he did very well last year, qualifying in the Fast 12, and I think he finished 14th or 13th off the top of my head, so we had a pretty decent run, and look, Sato is very popular. He's very fun to watch at the Speedway, and obviously he's a 2-time Indy 500 winner. So there's no real great surprises there with Sato coming back. I mean, he is getting on a bit now. He is 48, but again, no huge surprises because he is somebody who is quick at the Speedway and has obviously got great success there with RLL as well, obviously winning in 2020.
48, wow, that's amazing. It feels slightly ageless. I mean, he's always good fun. I think on like a single car run, he's about as fun a driver as there is to watch. He's always properly on the edge. Yeah, I think obviously RLL this year, they have Rahal's veteran expertise, but they've got Devin DiFrancesco, who obviously has had a year out. This is still in his 3rd year in IndyCar. They've got a rookie in Louis Foster. And I think they've always maintained that they would only continue to add a 4th car for added benefit. They wouldn't just do it for the sake of it. And I think Sato's expertise do for sure add benefit to them, and just gives another well, I mean, someone who's won multiple Indy 500s for these young drivers at the team, especially Foster making his Indy 500 debut, just to learn off above anything. And then, yeah, obviously he was fairly competitive last year. Finished one of 13th, 14th, or 15th because they're three cars that finished the race in a row, weren't they?
Yeah. I also confirms bumping, so that's our 34th confirmed entry. So we will have somebody bumped from the field this year, which is always awesome. I think, unfortunately, we'll be looking at Ray Hall and Lanigan in that mix again, just because they've been there the last couple of years. And I mean, I don't expect it to be Sato. I expect it to be one of his teammates. But yeah, that's really cool. There's one question mark basically now, which lies whether I mean, a coin or any Honda entry will field Catherine Legg, which is basically the last major question mark there is. And again, I can see this happening. I mean, Legg will definitely have sponsorship, and she definitely will have backing. But I guess it comes down to finding an entry and a team willing to field her. So that's the last question. Having 2 cars bump will be cool, but we definitely will have at least one car bump from the 500, which is always nice. Has that little bit of jeopardy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just having bumping alone, I mean, it would make qualifying weekend a lot more boring if you didn't have last chance qualifying, wouldn't it? As cruel and brutal as it is, but it brings out all the highs and lows, doesn't it? But yeah, obviously Legg still has Elf, who I believe are a partner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway as well. So I would imagine there's a lot of keenness for her to be in the field. That was obviously such a successful partnership last year. So I'd imagine they would allow her and bring the resources for her to make a run if there is availability at a team. I know obviously, yeah, you look at the teams, Ganassi Racing, could they yet field an extra entry possibly? I mean, did we speak about Linus Lundqvist's situation in the St. Pete review? We actually heard from him for the first time in a long while, basically confirming that his contract with Ganassi has been terminated. It was a multi-year deal. So more contract disputes and drama. But I think I'd kind of predicted in one of our prediction episodes that Lundqvist maybe would be in a 4th car with Ganassi, but seemingly ties have been cut there and that's not going to happen. I think he's basically saying that he's hoping the team can at least help him to land something for the future. So I wonder whether he's still an outside bet for the 500, but now he's been cut loose from Ganassi. Maybe that will not happen. Yeah, coin for Legg possibly. Are they going to be focused though on obviously getting their 2 entries competitive? Possibly. Yeah, just thought it was worth raising that Lundqvist thing. We've heard from him for, I mean, the first time I think all off season really.
We'll quickly touch on the IndyCar interest in 12 hours of Sebring, because that happened the last weekend. Penske won yet again in the number 7 entry, which won Daytona with Felipe Nasr, Nick Tandy, and Lawrence Van Toor. Alex Palou was back in the 93 Meyer Shank car. He finished 3rd overall, which is a pretty decent effort, must be said. Scott Dixon was alongside Colin Brown and Tom Blomqvist in the Meyer Shank racing entry. Again, they finished 10th, 5 laps down. A lot less IndyCar interest in here than there was in Daytona. Sebastian Bourdais finished 2nd in LMP2, whilst Hunter McElroy finished 3rd in class there. Ben Hanley, a good Manchester mate, finished 5th in class at the end there. With Toby Sowery, who we'll briefly touch on in a minute, finished 6th in class, and the same entry he went to Daytona with.
They were leading with 10 minutes to go and I think they had to have an emergency fuel.
Yes.
That's brutal. They were quick. Sowery was quick. He was fighting with Bourdais for the lead at one point. I didn't watch all of this race, but I saw parts of it. And one of those parts was when he was fighting with Bourdais for the lead, which I thought was quite cool.
Jack Hawksworth, ex-IndyCar driver, finished 2nd in GTD in the Vassar Sullivan racing car. James Hinchcliffe was back in the FAF Motorsports entry, but he was multiple laps down.
And the car fell on his foot.
Oh, yes, I saw this on Twitter. I don't really know what it meant. But
yeah, so they were doing a driver change, and obviously the team had actually, I presume, maybe done the pit stop too quickly, and the driver change was still happening. So as the car was dropped back down, it fell on Hinch's foot, and there was a screen grab doing the rounds where he looked in quite some pain, but after the initial shock of it, I think he was all right, and he got back in the car. So crisis averted.
Tatiana Calderon was 5 laps down, whilst one-time IndyCar driver Kevin Magnussen had an issue. So he was 31 laps down in the end from lead. Benjamin Pedersen didn't finish the race in the LMP2 entry because of overheating. Romain Grosjean and Danny Kvyat, alongside Danny Kvyat and a Lamborghini, had a mechanical issue. Carl Kirkwood and Vasser Sullivan had a suspension issue after 255 laps. So again, neither of us watched this. And Pietro Fittipaldi as well actually had an oil leak, which stopped his race in the LMP2 entry. Again, neither of us watched this, so we're just telling you the results. But there's that if you're interested. We briefly mentioned Toby Sowery just because he's also been announced as a reserve and development driver for RLL. So congratulations to a good friend of the podcast there. Yuri Vips's role remains unchanged at the team from what we gather. But Sowery will just be doing a bit of test and sim work for the team behind the scenes, which is cool to see him involved because he deserved an opportunity after what he showed last year. So it's good to see him have some involvement in this series, at least in some capacity, especially for a driver who does struggle with budget.
Yeah, I mean, there was no mention of Vips in the release, so you'd imagine he's still there.
It was confirmed he's still around. Yeah.
Was it? Okay. I didn't catch that. So yeah, but it's interesting that not many teams go down this route of having kind of reserve and test drivers. It's a very European Formula One style thing, isn't it? But I know there was a particular mention in the team's release of kind of hybrid work and getting used to just strategies there. So yeah, it's a lot of simulator work. It would be tough to see him getting actual race opportunities, but at least it'll mean he's on the ground. Maybe again, if you need substitutes for other teams as well, but obviously with the charter limiting the 3 charters per team and any non-chartered entries obviously having to go up against Prema to make the field, it would just not really be too logical to actually field Sowery, which is a shame, but at least it kind of keeps his foot in the door.
As you said, there was a Barber test as well last week. Not too much to report, apart from Felix Rosenqvist had quite a big accident, but he was all right in the end, I believe.
I think he crashed in the morning and in the afternoon.
So he went off track at turn 2 in the morning and then had quite a big crash at turn 1 in the afternoon. But he was all right. I think power topped the test in the end there, which is obviously a good bounce back. O'Ward was second in the test overall. As I said, we had the Thermal this weekend, the first and probably only ever championship race we're going to get at the Thermal Club. And Alex Palou obviously won the non-championship $1 million race last year, which wasn't $1 million, was $500K. But anyway, it's a different story, which we discussed last year. So it's going to be a difficult one for overtaking. We've never seen it with 27 cars concurrently, so that's a bit of a mystery. It's always been a bit difficult to overtake there. Thermal isn't the most popular track for reasons that we won't bore you with, because there isn't many grandstands and it's hard to overtake. But yeah, I think big emphasis on qualifying, I imagine, this weekend. And I think judging off Palou's form and the fact he was so dominant here last year, he's got to go in as the favourite.
It's a funny old track, really. A lot of the drivers actually seem to quite like it last year. There's been quite a lot of testing there, so even the rookies are actually fairly familiar with it. But it's kind of it's a track of 2 halves. It's like a quick section and a slower section. Obviously, the exclusivity was a stick that it was beaten with last year, and the lack of really space for grandstands and to allow fans in is a problem that has been earmarked there. So yeah, I mean, obviously with the Arlington date announced, which seems to be around this time next year, it's whether that slots in between St. Pete and Thermal or whether this is a one and done as a points race. I know, some drivers, to be fair, after last year, and I think this was more an indictment on the fact they didn't really like the exhibition field, but they said if they were to come back, they'd probably rather it be like a points race or maybe like a pre-season exhibition. So yeah, I mean, let's not judge it before it gets done, I guess, but it's an unknown because we've not seen obviously 27 cars on track all at once. Yeah.
So as I think Palou has to go in as the favourite just based on form and the fact he was strong here last year. So we're not going to judge it off, but there is no clear overtaking opportunities on that track, which is the issue. There's nowhere. Okay, that's a great overtaking point. Like there is St. Petersburg turn 1. Okay, that's the main overtaking. So Thermal is too flowy in some sections and it's too windy, which I know it's not as bad as it is in some other series, but the aerodynamics get in the way of things. So it's going to be an interesting weekend. A lot of emphasis on, I guess, there's going to be on strategy. Tyres are a big talking point here last year.
A lot of deg. There was a lot of deg, which obviously then saw likes of Colton Hurchan and others who follow suit in that the final All-Star race back up.
It can't be any worse than it was at times last year, this race, because we have people going as slowly as they possibly could.
Sure.
Look, I'm open to ideas. I mean, McLaughlin ran well here last year. Shank ran well here last year. It's obviously going to be the first road course of the year. Will it be in one and done? I don't think people will really be too bothered if it goes after this year. I certainly won't be.
It might be an absolute barnstormer this weekend.
Okay, but doesn't mean I want to keep it.
Actually, no, I'm not going to say it probably won't be. It will be. Watch it. Get that. This is a nice segue to TV rating. We didn't touch on this because it came out after our St. Pete episode, and I know Connor Daly mentioned it, but 1.4. Well, it was like 1.417 million viewers, I think, which is a pretty decent start for St. Pete. I've seen some kind of thermal specific advertising as well from Fox, so good to see they've kept pushing. I know this break's not great for momentum.
And this weekend clashes of NASCAR,
which isn't ideal. Obviously, 2 Fox properties as well. Although I guess is NASCAR on like the CW or something this weekend?
No, I'll be on FS1, I'd imagine.
Do you think so? Okay. So yeah, that's not ideal actually, 2 Fox properties clashing, but I guess it's kind of unavoidable at times, just logistically. But I think 1.4 million is a decent start. I know kind of 1.5 million is what people have said, but it's the best. The stats was something like it was the best in 14 years on a network, basically, because NBC had, when it was St. Pete in
22, I think, was pretty much identical numbers wise. It was a couple of thousand in it, and that
NBC also included its streaming service Peacock, which Fox doesn't have an equivalent of. So taking away that kind of streaming service element,
Fox's own decision to not have a streaming.
No, of course, but Fox have towed the line that on purely a network television, it's the best since like I think 2011. But even including the NBC and the way that they've done it, including Peacock, only that 2022 St. Pete, it was 2022, right? Was it?
I think so, 22. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, this one St. Pete race in the last few years is the only race since I think 2011 that has basically reached this tally. That's not the Indy 500, which is great. I mean, last year I don't think there was another. Maybe there was one other race. I think Mid Ohio got over 1 million, but other than that, it was the Indy 500 and nothing else. It was, I mean, I think it was a 45% increase off the top of my head as well, St. Pete last year to this year. So an astronomical boom. I don't think you can complain with that as a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely still room for improvement, and after the amount of promotion they put in, you'd really want to see these numbers. This weekend will be a very important metric because, one, do you retain those viewers? Because if you lose half of them, well, you're back to square one. And obviously, how will it do clashing with NASCAR? So there's 2 really big question marks there about, well, 2 challenges they've got to face this weekend, which we'll see obviously in the ratings. But it's a good start to life. I think it's encouraging. I think there's still more work to do, and I think Connor Daly was really good saying this last week. Okay, NASCAR's getting 3-4 million people a week. Well, if they're a race fan, why aren't they watching a sport which has just good racing and is on a similar time? But we'd both say is better to watch. So why aren't IndyCar converting its fans from NASCAR? So that's one of those sort of questions there, which is something IndyCar needs to chip away at. It needs to. It's hard to say they need to beat NASCAR because that's not something which happens overnight. But that's like, okay, we need to get these numbers closer to NASCAR. How do we convert those fans into IndyCar fans? Because there's obviously a racing interest in America, but how do you convert them? That was a really good point made by Connor Daly, I think. So
I agree.
That's something which I think needs consideration. That's where the margin still is. When I say there's still room to improve, that is where that room for improvement is, into getting those figures closer and closer and closer to what the Cup Series is doing. And as I said, this weekend will be really important because they clash.
And we've got to see, we've got to see all the viewers that we saw in St. Pete retained and built upon. Ultimately, that's what you've got to see. You can't be dropping down. I mean, even saying like over 1 million would be good, but once you've got 1.4 million, any drop isn't ideal, is it?
Do you remember last year we had the thermal made for TV exhibition and it got very little views?
Oh, it was pathetic. It was a I don't want to say it was a failure because at the time, as we said, it was like
they marketed it as. I mean, it was better than no racing at all, which was the alternative.
It would have been 6 weeks, yeah.
But yeah, it was not great.
Yeah, it wasn't fantastic. But no,
it could have been done better, I think, is what.
Definitely. But we won't open that kind of worms again. I think ultimately what the last thing to be said on kind of ratings and viewership is you've just got to hope that this 3 weeks hasn't killed a bit of momentum and hasn't killed, and I guess if it has done, you've only got limited races up until the 500. I think post Indy 500, that's chance for probably the biggest traction that we'll see this season. But to build a foundation before then is also needs to be done.
Right, as it is racing this weekend, we have got predictions to do. I believe you lead me in the Fast Six predictor tournament. I'll be getting 2 tournaments combined. The Fast Six predictor tournament by, I believe, 1 point. The podium predictor tournament, I believe, I still lead. And we obviously if you're new to the podcast, what we normally do is do our predictions the week before. We didn't do it on the preview episode, but what we will do each week is predict our Fast Six for this weekend's event, just so you have it locked and loaded. There is one exception, which is the very, very, very end of the season and the finale, if it's still within 6 points, that is, which it was last year. We were, I think, within 1 last year. So give us a couple of minutes and we will come back with our Fast Six for the Thermal Club. Fast Six Predictor Tournament. I am going to start off with Alex Pillow.
Oh, we're doing it one by one, are we?
Let's do it one by one this time. Yeah, let's make it a bit spicy. Now there's only 2 of us doing this. Let's go one by one.
This is really spicy. Alex Pillow.
Ooh, Scott McLaughlin. I'm going brave this week.
Scott McLaughlin? No way.
Ooh. I feel this would be bold. I feel like now it's a fairly safe bet to have Felix Rosenqvist in these, so I've gone for Felix Rosenqvist.
I'm matching you, Felix Rosenqvist as well.
Yeah, I feel like it's a bit weird now that Rosenqvist is such a safe bet for these sort of things now, but he's just a very good qualifier, so he's just a safe bet. I was very impressed by Armstrong at St. Petersburg, and Shank had been good, and he actually qualified second in his heat here last year. So I'm going Marcus Armstrong.
This is really boring competition. Marcus Armstrong is on my list as well because I remembered him being pretty good last year.
Right, so now we need to really hope we get something different. I've gone Joseph Newgarden.
I've got Scott Dixon.
Okay, fine. So we do have a different list, thankfully. Viewers, don't be scared. I've finished off with Carl Kirkwood.
So did I.
Okay, right. So we've got Pillow.
If you don't believe me, I can show my whiteboard.
He's got the evidence there. Just about.
There's the evidence.
So we've both gone for Pillow, Rosenqvist, McLaughlin, Kirkwood, and Armstrong. I've gone for Newgarden, and you've gone for Dixon. So IndyCar is back this weekend, as we said, at the Thermal Club. Those are our Fast Six predictions. I mean, feel free to let us know yours. And as always, we've had quite a good response the last couple of weeks. A lot of you listened to the Connor Daily episode, so hopefully you enjoyed that. And please continue to listen along. We do appreciate the new support on the podcast. If you are new, feel free to get in touch at DIVEBOMB Motorsport on Instagram. Or if you wanted to, alternatively comment on YouTube or Spotify. And we, of course, do read some of your comments. And all the support recently is really appreciated by us. So get in touch as always. Let us know your thoughts. What do you expect from the Thermal weekend? And if you do want the coverage, all the reports, all the updates, all the reaction, all the news, look at the DIVEBOMB website over the weekend. www.dive-bomb.com for all the IndyCar action for the Thermal. And if you're not only an IndyCar fan, if you're a motorsport fan of other series, we do have quite a portfolio if you are new to DIVEBOMB. So there's plenty to look out for on the website, not just IndyCar, but that's obviously what we are here for. And of course, we will be back here next Tuesday to give our thoughts on the inaugural, what do they call it, the Grand Prix of Thermal? I guess that's what they're calling it.
I mean, it's not the $1 million challenge anymore. That's all I can give.
The Thermal
Grand Prix of Thermal. I think it's the Grand Prix of Thermal. I don't know.
I don't know, we'll say the Thermal Grand Prix for now. So come back on Tuesday for the Thermal Grand Prix of Thermal, not the $1 million challenge, whatever it's called. Come back and we'll try and react to it the best we possibly can. But for this time, thanks very much for watching, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.